Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, What Works Clearinghouse Resources You Can Use, a webinar for faculty of principal and teacher preparation programs. Just some housekeeping before we get started. You can make slides bigger on your screen by clicking on the gray triangle at the bottom right corner of the slides window and dragging. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tool on the webinar software on your screen. You can ask a question when it comes to mind. You don't have to wait until the question and answer session particularly. Because we're recording this event, every member of the audience is in listen-only mode. That improves the sound quality of the recording, but it also means that the only way to ask questions is through the Q&A answer tool. So please use that during the webcast. We've scheduled an hour for this webinar, but if we don't make it through all of the questions we've received, we will respond to your questions via email. The slide deck and a recording, as well as a transcript of the webinar, will be available on the What Works Clearinghouse website for download. So with that introduction, let's get started. I'd like to now introduce Neil Sefter, What Works Clearinghouse Project Director and Senior Economist for Mathematica Policy Research. Neil, you now have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our webinar on the What Works Clearinghouse, or WWC for short, which is an initiative of the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. I'm Neil Sefter, a senior economist at Mathematica Policy Research and the project director of Mathematica's work on the WWC. One of my co-presenters is Josh Ferguson, also a senior researcher at Mathematica. He is the lead methodologist for the Clearinghouse's special education areas and also leads the Clearinghouse practice guides. I want to thank David Chard for agreeing to do the introduction for this webinar. David is the Dean of the Annette Caldwell Simmons School of Education and Development at Southern Methodist University and Chair of the National Board for Education Sciences. The board is an external body of experts that advises IES. Rounding out our presenters, I would like to thank Kathy Schiffman for sharing her insights today. Kathy is a professor of leadership education at Shenandoah University and currently uses WWC products in the education leadership classes she teaches. Finally, also joining us today from the Institute of Education Sciences are Ruth Neild, the Commissioner for IES's National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance, Joy Lesnick, the Associate Commissioner for the Center, and Diana McCallum and Vanessa Anderson, the Project Officers for the What Works Clearinghouse. First, let me give a quick overview of the presentation. First, David will provide some motivation for this webinar and an overview of the WWC. Next, I will describe some important WWC products that you can use, and I'll talk about how the WWC ensures that our summaries include all relevant studies that are high quality. Next, using individual case studies, Josh will demonstrate how WWC products and the website can be used to help your students with common issues faced by educators. And finally, Kathy will talk about how the WWC can be used as a resource in your classes. The presentation will close with ways you can stay connected to the WWC, and we'll use the remaining time to answer questions you submit. And now I'll turn it over to David Chard, who will give a little background on the WWC.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and honor to be part of this webinar, and I just want to make some opening brief comments about the importance of the What Works Clearinghouse to the work that we do in schools of education in the preparation of principals, school leaders in general, and teachers in particular. I think it's absolutely critical that we understand that over the past 10 to 15 years, our field has really taken a major step forward by advancing the use of strong methodological tools for improving our understanding of what works and why it works in classrooms with America's school children. And the Institute for Education Science has invested a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars in the development of the What Works Clearinghouse to serve as an important tool in the shift of this culture. It is critical that I think as leaders of schools of education, as we think about preparing teachers and school principals and other school leaders, that we understand the important nature of their developing an understanding of how research works, and more importantly, where to look for the most trustworthy kinds of findings. And this is why the What Works Clearinghouse is so important to what we do. It really is a focus on using science to understand how children learn and how we can best teach, how can we best organize schools and teach them so that they can achieve the kinds of outcomes in school and for life that we know that everyone desires. The What Works Clearinghouse is particularly important because of its trustworthiness and the fact that the work that Mathematica and its team does to ensure that we are looking at the best evidence on any particular topic, and that they have the skills and knowledge to sift through the evidence and identify the findings that are most important and that we can trust to implement in our classrooms and our schools. And so what you see on the What Works Clearinghouse is really a summary of the evidence on topics and on approaches that are used in schools. And the What Works Clearinghouse is designed to be impartial and to employ rigorous and transparent standards, and that our pre-service teachers and pre-service leaders can learn to use as they move into their positions in our public schools. I'm not sure if this is, I just wanted to say one more word about the fact that on behalf of the National Board for Education Sciences, we understand that the investment in the What Works Clearinghouse is one of the most critical parts of what IES does, and that we spend a tremendous amount of time focused on how to help IES and the team at IES and Mathematica to improve the relevance and focus of what works so that teachers and principals can benefit the most, and that it can be user-friendly and directly applicable to the kinds of decision-making that they're using in schools all the time. So this slide, Neil, am I handing it back to you or continuing?
If you're done with yours, I can go right ahead. Thank you
Terrific.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Mm-hmm.
As the project director of the WWC's work at Mathematica, I'll be talking to you today about WWC products, processes, and standards. All WWC products are available for free on our website, and this slide shows a screenshot of our homepage with many of the menus expanded to show their content. There's a lot happening in this slide because there's a lot happening with the WWC, and we wanted to show everything so you'd get a sense of all we have to offer. Let me highlight a few things. First, like schools, classrooms, and students, the WWC is organized by topics. The topics may be outcomes, such as math skills, student populations, such as elementary students or students with learning disabilities, or the type of intervention, such as school choice. If you're interested in learning more about a particular topic, this is the place to start. You can also go directly to our publications and reviews. I'll talk about those in a minute. For folks interested in the details of what we do, you can download some of our great reference material, such as the Procedures and Standards Handbook and our review protocols. The Inside the WWC provides more information about how we conduct our reviews, as well as providing access to databases where you can search for studies that we've reviewed, or for people who have been certified to do WWC reviews through our rigorous training and certification process. Finally, under News and Events, there are several ways to stay connected with the WWC and learn about our new products as they're released. The next slide shows 4 of our popular products. Intervention reports and practice guides are particularly relevant for you and your students, so we'll focus on those during this presentation. Intervention reports are based on a systematic review of all of the research on a specific intervention, and they result in a summary of findings from the rigorous evidence. Practice guides provide actionable guidance on a specific topic, typically related to instruction. The guides also describe the level of evidence supporting the guidance. Single study reviews apply WWC standards to an individual study, and for studies that meet standards, summarize the research. Finally, quick reviews are the WWC's initial assessment, usually within a week or two, of an education study that has received significant media attention. To give you an idea of how much we have to offer, here are some quick facts on the scale of our products. First, we reviewed over 10,000 studies. We've released over 200 intervention reports that summarize evidence, and there are several hundred more reports that find there's not rigorous evidence on an intervention. Some reports review the same intervention, but for different populations, such as general and special education students. And finally, we have 18 practice guides, ranging from reading comprehension in grades K through 3 to helping students navigate the path to college. For intervention reports and practice guides, the first step in the WWC process is to conduct a systematic search for all relevant studies. That includes electronic databases, organizational websites, and gray literature to identify any possible studies of an intervention or practice. This typically identifies thousands of publications. As you can imagine, the publications vary widely, from testimonials and implementation analyses to measurement and assessment studies, and finally a few effectiveness studies. The WWC focuses on these effectiveness studies that use rigorous research designs. Each study is also screened to make sure that the study examines a population, intervention, and outcome of interest to the particular review. Studies that meet these eligibility criteria are then reviewed against WWC design standards. Because there's such a range of research quality, not all research can reliably isolate the effect of an intervention. The WWC standards are a set of criteria developed by panels of experts to assess research quality. The standards are available on our website in the Procedures and Standards Handbook. Specifically, the standards focus on the causal validity of the study design and analysis. These standards allow us to be confident that any improvement in student outcomes is due to the intervention being studied and not other differences between the treatment and control groups, such as district characteristics or teachers or schools. In our reports, we describe important contextual factors in the studies. The standards are applied by trained and certified reviewers to each study and are ultimately used to assign one of 3 ratings to each study. The highest rating, meets WWC standards without reservations, is reserved for studies with the highest degree of causal validity, such as randomized controlled trials with low attrition. The next rating, meets WWC standards with reservations, applies to studies that provide causal evidence but with a lower degree of confidence, such as a quasi-experimental design with similar groups. The final rating, does not meet WWC standards, is given to studies that have not demonstrated that rigorous causal link between the intervention being studied and the findings presented. I'll now turn it over to Josh, who will present 3 case studies on how you and your students can use the WWC.
Thanks, Neil. Each of the 3 case studies I will be presenting covers a common situation or problem that your students will face as teachers or leaders. I'm going to describe how educators can use WWC products to make evidence-based decisions in these situations. The first situation I'm going to discuss occurs when an educator hears that an intervention is research-based and wonders what the evidence really says about the intervention. By intervention, I mean a program, curriculum, policy, or practice. The Clearinghouse really reviews the gamut. For this case study, I'm going to specifically talk about Read Naturally, but there are hundreds of other interventions reviewed by the What Works Clearinghouse, such as Read 180 everyday mathematics, accelerated reader, and repeated reading. I'm now going to provide a demonstration of how quickly your students can learn more about Read Naturally on the What Works Clearinghouse website. Here is the What Works Clearinghouse homepage, the home of all Clearinghouse products. For this case, we are interested in learning more about Read Naturally. On the What Works Clearinghouse homepage, we go to the search box in the upper right of the web page and search for Read Naturally. The search returns several intervention reports for different student populations: students with learning disabilities, adolescent readers, beginning readers, and English learners. Let's say that we are interested in early reading, and beginning readers seems like the most appropriate for that population, so we click on that. We then go to the landing page for the intervention report on Read Naturally. I hope this conveys how easy it is to use the What Works Clearinghouse website. Now, on the right side of this slide, I have a screenshot of the landing page for our search on Read Naturally. There's a lot of information here. Let me provide a quick summary, and then I'll discuss the specific sections of the landing page. This intervention report provides an educator or your students with accessible summaries of all the high-quality evidence on Read Naturally. To create the intervention report, we sifted through all the studies evaluating Read Naturally that included young readers and summarized the high-quality ones. I should note that we spent several weeks or months of staff time identifying the studies, reviewing them, and then developing the report. Then the report was peer-reviewed. This process hopefully leads to quality products that your students can rely on. Now, on this landing page and in the intervention report, present Read Naturally's impact on important outcome domains. A domain is a category that the Clearinghouse uses to classify closely related outcomes. For example, the reading fluency domain might summarize study findings that use the Gray Oral Reading Fluency Subtest and a curriculum-based test of reading fluency. Finally, the report provides important context for the studies, such as student populations, the settings, and what students in the comparison group are doing. For example, whether the comparison students receive instruction from another supplement or receive nothing at all in terms of instruction. As you know, this contextual information is essential for understanding whether impacts are relevant for particular students. We could download the report by clicking the Download Full Report right here in the upper left corner of the web page. But because our reports are so comprehensive, this one is 32 pages with appendices, I'll instead focus on the specific information you can find on the landing page. Many WWC products have both comprehensive documents for people who really want to dig into a topic and quick summaries for educators who just want the conclusions. This landing page provides the quick summary, and now I'll describe the information in each section. First, we see a succinct textual summary of the intervention's impact in each of the outcome domains. This summary is based solely on the high-quality studies that meet WWC standards. These are believable impacts. Next is a paragraph describing the intervention, including the basic components. More details about implementing the intervention, as well as the cost and developer contact information, are available in the intervention report. The landing page also summarizes the studies that form the basis of the report to provide a sense of the evidence. Here, we learned that there were 5 studies that met standards and included young readers. Collectively, these studies included 484 students. So that you can get a quick sense of how extensive the evidence is, for each outcome domain, the What Works Clearinghouse classifies the extent of evidence as small or medium to large. This rating is based on the total number of students in schools in all of the studies. For Read Naturally, 2 outcome domains have a small extent of evidence, and the extent of evidence for the other 2 outcome domains is medium to large. The extent of evidence can differ by domain because some of the studies only had outcomes in one domain, and thus some domains had fewer students than others. Finally, the WWC also displays a summary of the studying findings by domain. I think this figure does a really nice job conveying a lot of information. First, in the general literacy achievement outcome domain, Read Naturally had an average improvement index of 10, meaning it would have improved the average comparison student's achievement in this domain by about 10 percentile points. We see that the effectiveness rating is 1+ sign, which means potentially positive. And finally, we see a summary of the extent of evidence. The figure also has nice functionality on the website. If you want more information about the improvement index, the effectiveness rating, or the extent of evidence, you just hover your cursor over the title, and it will give you a definition and explanation. As I mentioned, more information about any of these topics can be obtained by downloading the report. Now for the second case study, we're going to talk about a common situation encountered when educators, such as teachers, want to use evidence-based instructional practices in their classrooms, or when their school leaders want their teachers to use such practices. For this case study, let's focus on evidence-based practices that can be used with English learners. Let's do another demonstration with the website. Now for this case, we are interested in learning more about instruction for English learners. Here is the Clearinghouse homepage again. First, I'll click on Topics in Education, and then English Language Learners. Now the first product returned in this area is Teaching Academic Content and Literacy to English Learners in Elementary and Middle Schools. Clicking on this, we find that we can download this practice guide in several different formats, as a PDF, an ebook for your Kindle or phone, or a webinar about the guide. Now because this guide has several recommendations and is comprehensive, we don't have time to go through the whole thing. Instead, I'm going to focus on one of the 4 recommendations to illustrate the guide's features. On the right side of this slide, we see the first page of the first recommendation in the English Learners Practice Guide. Let me provide a quick summary about the guides, and then I'll provide more information about important guide features. Each guide has several recommendations, and each recommendation provides actionable guidance developed by a panel of experts. The experts work closely with What Works Clearinghouse staff and several active teachers or educators to ensure that the recommendations are useful and accessible. Each recommendation also provides examples that illustrate the guidance or can be used in class. Finally, the level of evidence supporting each recommendation is provided. The levels are strong, moderate, or minimal. This enables teachers to see whether and how much the advice is evidence-based. I can tell you that experts are often surprised when there is not a lot of rigorous evidence supporting a very common practice in the field. Of course, the practice might be effective, it's just not research-based. Now let's take a closer look at Recommendation 1. This recommendation asks teachers to teach a set of academic vocabulary words intensively across several days using a variety of activities. Now the evidence for this recommendation is strong. This means that there were several supporting studies that met What Works Clearinghouse standards, and the study samples collectively represent the population on which the recommendation is focused. In other words, there is both internal and external validity. There is a short paragraph describing the evidence, and for those interested, a more detailed description is provided in the appendix. As I mentioned, we try to target our products and even sections of our products for specific audience needs. After the level of evidence, the recommendation provides a description of important terms, in this case academic vocabulary. We work hard to make sure the guides do not have jargon so they are accessible to educators from diverse backgrounds. When the guides need to use specific instructional terms such as academic vocabulary, we make sure to provide a definition. Now let's dig a little deeper into the specific action steps listed. In the second action step, the recommendation asks teachers to choose a small set of academic vocabulary for in-depth instruction. We make these really concrete. The text in the action step provides specific guidance on how to choose these words. For example, they should be central to understanding the text, some of the words should have multiple meanings, and some should be alterable by prefixes and suffixes. Each recommendation also provides several examples to illustrate the concept or to be used in class. In this example, we see the academic vocabulary that a teacher selected for her class and why she chose those words. Each recommendation also describes some difficulties that teachers might face when implementing the recommendation and what the panel believes the teacher should do in those situations. Practice guides are the Clearinghouse most popular product, with several being downloaded more than 100,000 times. The guides cover many areas, and others are in the works. I encourage you to check them out. For the final case study, we have another common problem faced by educators, identifying an effective intervention for a specific topic or population. For this case study, let's focus on identifying a math curriculum that is evidence-based. The WWC has a really nice search tool called Find What Works that can help you identify interventions for a subject or population. You'll find the Find What Works tool in the center of the What Works Clearinghouse homepage, and it's also a menu option. There is some good functionality with this tool. Find What Works allows you to focus your search on a particular topic, a particular grade level or levels, an effectiveness rating, and remember that's the Clearinghouse's summary of the intervention's impact, the extent of evidence, which is the Clearinghouse's summary of how many students and schools are in the supporting evidence, and the delivery method, such as individual, small group, whole class, or whole school. I have a screenshot from the results of a search I did on Find What Works. In this search, I chose math. I thought I'd look for elementary grades and selected grades K through 5. I did not. I wanted to see what the research says about all interventions, so I did not select an evidence rating or extent of evidence. For delivery method, I selected whole class because we're looking for a curriculum. Find What Works identified 8 interventions with evidence that have been reviewed by the What Works Clearinghouse and meet these criteria. By clicking on Research Details, we get a quick summary of a lot of useful information in the bottom right corner of your slide. We learn the number of studies that met standards with and without reservations, the number of students and schools in those studies, and the grades that the students were in. Notice that the intervention name is a hyperlink, and by clicking on that, we go to the intervention report landing page for more information about the intervention. Now, these interventions are initially sorted in order of improvement index, but you can sort by whatever characteristic you want. Another option for this case study is to choose math from the topics listed on the What Works Clearinghouse homepage, like how I did it with English language learners in the second case study. Selecting this topic takes us to a landing page for all math resources in the What Works Clearinghouse, and that's displayed on the right side of the slide. On this landing page, you'll find a video providing guidance on choosing math instructional materials, links to all the math practice guides, and quick links to find what works in math. I'll now turn it over to Kathy, who is going to describe some specific What Works Clearinghouse activities she has used in her educational leadership classes.
Thanks, Josh. As you can probably tell, there are many ways you can use What Works Clearinghouse materials in leader or educator preparation courses. And these can support knowledge and skills that are identified as important in program accreditation standards. I'm going to share a few examples that build on the cases Josh just discussed, and I hope this gives you some ideas for your own teaching. I'll start with a simple activity. Last spring, I introduced our principal preparation students at Shenandoah to program evaluations by assigning a What Works Clearinghouse single study review. I chose the one you see here, High School Students as Mentors, Findings from the Big Brother, Big Sisters Impact Study, because it was a fairly straightforward and brief report. So students read the first couple of pages in class and then identified unfamiliar terms and concepts and made observations about the study design. So this served as an introductory activity that helped me get a sense of where students were in their understanding. It pointed to where we needed to go, and it also began a discussion that extended over the semester about evaluations, different kinds of evidence, and how to interpret findings. Now this is an assignment, is one I haven't used yet, but I have used similar ones, and I could use this in my policy class, leadership, or evaluation course. It's a group project that calls on students to review interventions in a particular What Works Clearinghouse topic area, and then apply what they learned to choosing an intervention. So let's take dropout prevention as a topic area. To get started, students read the Dropout Prevention Evidence Review Protocol. That's the first source that comes up. And it gives a nice overview of various interventions, key definitions, and existing research studies. Then each group would review the 35-odd reports that show up in this topic area to select one intervention that they then must defend to their class. So both the selection and the supporting rationale for that selection become the focus of this project. An assignment like this does a couple of things. It exposes students to the What Works Clearinghouse as a reliable information source both now and in the future. And it also gives students practice reviewing and using research-based evidence to inform curricular and instructional decisions. This is a professional skill that is identified in NCAPE's program accreditation standards, and is a task leaders are called on to carry out in schools and school systems. At Shenandoah, we require students in our school community relations course to prepare and deliver a mock presentation about an academic initiative that's designed for our stakeholder groups, such as families. The What Works Clearinghouse products can be a resource for developing these student presentations because they offer research-based evidence from an impartial source that's been rigorously reviewed. So this can offer students an alternative or an additional source of information available otherwise available, such as marketing materials and other similar kinds of sources you find on the internet. For example, let's say a student decides to prepare a presentation about math instruction for elementary school families. The student can go to the What Works Clearinghouse website to review and reference evidence in the practice guide that you see here, Improving Mathematical Problem Solving in Grades 4 through 8. Not only does this guide offer content for the student's presentation, it also includes short videos and one-page recommendations that the student might incorporate into the presentation and disseminate to that family audience as part of the presentation. This assignment gives students practice communicating information about the school within the community, which also is a professional skill identified in NCAPE's program accreditation standards, and certainly a task leaders are frequently called on to carry out. So these are just a few examples. I hope this generates some ideas for your work with students. Thanks, and I'll turn it back over to Josh.
Thanks, Kathy. Front and center on the What Works Clearinghouse homepage is a set of rotating tiles that highlight recent products or resources around a theme. These tiles are regularly updated, and you should check the What Works Clearinghouse website frequently to see the latest news. For example, we recently had a literacy bulletin that provides readers with relevant What Works Clearinghouse literacy resources, relevant practice guides on reading and writing, and quick links to find what works in literacy. You can also receive regular updates on new What Works Clearinghouse products through social media by friending us on Facebook or following us on Twitter. And the information is available on your slide. You can also sign up to receive email news flashes on the What Works Clearinghouse website. Now, before we get to the actual questions and answers for this webinar, let me talk briefly about how you can help improve the Clearinghouse. If you have a suggestion or question, the best way to reach us is through our help desk. You can get to the help desk through our Contact Us page. I'd just like to really encourage you all to do this. We take the suggestions and advice very seriously, and it often shapes the work that we do. And so we really appreciate any feedback you can provide us with. Okay. So now I think it's time for the question and answer part of our webinar. For those of you who might have missed the introduction at the beginning, if you want to submit questions, use the Q&A tool on your webinar software. And I'll now turn it over to Jill Constantine, who is a principal investigator for the What Works Clearinghouse, and will share some of the questions with us.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good late morning, depending on where you're joined us from. We thank you all for taking part in the webinar. We have a number of good questions in the queue already, many of them general questions about resources available on the Clearinghouse and how we do our work. So we are going to read the questions out loud. As Josh said at the beginning, all the audience is on mute to make the sound quality as good as possible. So as we get questions into the question box, we read them out loud and we direct them to one of our panelists. So we will begin to read those questions and our panelists will answer. But if you have any questions as we go through this process, please feel free to submit them to the question box at any time. So our very first question is for Neil. We've actually gotten a couple of questions about this, and that's for Neil. Do you have any materials you recommend that our audience uses to introduce students to the WWC, and specifically how they might learn to navigate the website to gain access to all that the WWC offers?
Sure. Thanks, Jill. We have a lot of information that describes both the Clearinghouse and our processes. One good place to start is our new electronic brochure, which you can find under the About the WWC section under About Us. This brochure describes all of our different products that we talked about earlier, and tells how to find your way through the site and our reference materials and so on. So that's a good place to start. The second place I might recommend is under the Inside the WWC menu, which really goes into the details about the Clearinghouse, how we do our work, and the kind of standards we use and so on, for people who are more interested in kind of the nuts and bolts of what we do.
Great. Thanks, Neil. The next question is for Kathy. Kathy, the audience members were interested in the example you provided, your examples about how you use WWC materials, but we've gotten a question or two where people would like to hear a little bit more about how students receive those WWC materials that you used in those exercises, if you got feedback about that and how they reacted to that being used in class. Kathy?
Kathy, you may be on mute.
Right.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Thanks very much. I found using these materials got some very rich discussions around what is research, what are evaluations, and what do we do when the interventions have less evidence than we thought. And this is the kind of critical thinking we want to encourage in our preparation programs to prepare people for going into a tough job. And I think it's a conversation we all struggle with, but it's a good one to have. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Josh, the next one is going to you. this question comes from an audience member that wants to know whether the WWC has any resources for teaching science, social studies, or foreign languages, since some of the examples people have been given have focused mainly on math and reading. So audience is interested in knowing about those other topic areas, and also whether the WWC has planned to develop materials for those additional topics.
Sure, it's a good question. We do have some resources available in science. We've evaluated several science interventions, and there are intervention reports. We have, I think, at least one practice guide that discusses science. It's on teaching math and science to girls. We don't have much right now on social studies or foreign language, but that may change. And let me just use this as another chance to plug our help desk. When we're looking for new topics to release products on, we often use feedback submitted to our help desk to identify those topics. And we also look at other things such as maybe trends in the policy world, et cetera, and changes in curriculum. But it's really helpful when we get feedback from educators out in the field and they submit things through our help desk. So just another plug. If you're interested in a specific topic being covered, please make a suggestion on the help desk, and we'll take it under consideration.
Great. Thank you, Josh. The next one is also for Neil. Neil, we have a question from an audience member wanting to know more about what are the standards used to determine the quality of research?
That's a good question, and it's kind of central to the work we do. As part of the whole systematic review process, it all comes down to reviewing individual studies against these standards. So as I said earlier, we are really focused on causal validity. That is, do we believe that the findings that the study presents are due to the intervention to the program that they're studying? And so we have a lot of these standards and things we look for in the study design to let us decide whether we think that the findings are believable. These vary by the type of design the study uses. We have standards for randomized controlled trials. The key feature we look at there is how much sample loss they have, because once you start losing sample, you're getting away from that nicely created pair of groups that are similar just due to randomness. For quasi-experimental designs, we focus heavily on showing that the groups are similar at the beginning. So if they're similar at the beginning and we see something at the end, that's more of an indication that the findings are believable. We also have some pilot standards for regression discontinuity designs and single case designs. And the standards in those cases were developed by panels of experts on those designs and focus really on specifics related to those types of designs, such as the bandwidth in regression discontinuity and the number of observations and the timing in single case designs.
Great. Thank you, Neil. We're going to do a follow-on one for you, Neil, that we're getting a couple different versions of. And that is, do you have any charts to allow audience members, if they wanted to compare effectiveness of different programs?
Sure. The best way to do that, and Josh highlighted it, is our Find What Works tool. So using that tool, you can identify a topic or a type of program or a type of population that you're interested in, and it will find all of our reports that deal with those, meet those criteria. And then for those different interventions, we report a summary of the evidence to show how effective the programs are. So I think in Josh's example, he was looking at math, and you can see a list of I think he had 8 different math programs, and you can see the size, the improvement index, which is how we measure how effective a program is. You can compare the improvement index across those different programs. So that's one way to look at it. Our practice guides also provide evidence about different types of practices. So we provide a lot of information that you can use to evaluate these different types of interventions.
Thank you, Neil. The next question is going to be for Josh, and it's one that we get a lot at the Clearinghouse. Josh, audience members want to know, how do universities order copies of the practice guides to be able to provide to their students?
Yeah, all What Works Clearinghouse products, including the practice guides, are available for free on our website. So you can go to our website and download any product, and they're all available for free. If you would like maybe a higher resolution version of the products, so for printing and distribution in that manner, then you can put in an inquiry with our help desk, and they will make sure to get you a high resolution version of the product that you're looking for.
Great, thank you, Josh. Neil, another one for you about resources available on the website. Do you have information on practices and strategies for transitioning to post-secondary education on the WWC webpage?
That's a great and timely question. We have a practice guide on navigating the path to college, which discusses some of the steps along the preparation for an application and enrolling in college. But very soon we will be rolling out a post-secondary area, which looks at a lot of interventions to help with developmental programs and programs once students get to college. So you should look for that soon. We'll have a lot more information on post-secondary.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Here's another question. It's coming in a couple different ways, so it's very much on people's minds. People would like to know if they can share either the slides with their fellow colleagues as part of a presentation, and how to access the slide, and if the webinar itself will be available later to be able to be shared with colleagues.
Perhaps I should let the producer answer that one. Actually, we would be happy if you shared the presentation with your faculty. Part of this webinar is to get more information about the WWC spread widely. So it would be great if you shared both the slides and other information you have with your faculty. I believe the slides and webinar are available within this On24 session, but the producer may be able to provide more details on accessing those.
Sure. So thanks, Neil. To access the resource widget in your console, you're going to want to look for the green folder, or the green icon rather, at the bottom of your screen. That'll give you access to both the slide deck as well as the navigation slides for the console if you have any questions about the other components of the webcast.
I'll just add that they'll also be posted, the transcript and the slide deck will also be posted to the What Works Clearinghouse homepage, to the What Works Clearinghouse website soon.
Great, thank you. And we are very pleased that everybody is finding the materials useful and wants to use them. The next question is for Kathy. This is also kind of an advice question for using these materials in class. One audience member is enjoying the webinar. Thank you very much for letting us know that. It indicates that they're going to teach a class called Data for School Improvement, and those students will be principals and superintendents. So that audience member is looking for a recommendation on how you go about thinking about the materials you used, or how you kind of start with the WWC resources and think about whether certain resources might be useful for that particular class for those particular students.
I'll start, and then Josh or Neil may want to jump in with more products on the Clearinghouse. I would probably try out an activity similar to the second one I suggested, where you have people working in groups, reviewing interventions, as a way to start determining what kinds of evidence can be used. I think I'm going to turn that back over to Josh or Neil, who can speak to what resources on data for school improvement are out there.
Sure. So we have several. If you'll remember when I did the Find What Works demonstration, one of the options that people can select is whole school. That's the level of implementation of the program. And so I think if people are interested in whole school reform or things like that, they can. We've reviewed several interventions such as Success for All that are based on whole school reform. I think there's also, yes, there is also a practice guide that talks specifically about instructional practices at a school at a very macro level, although I think that practice guide is several years old, and there's probably more recent information that would be helpful on doing that. Neil, do you have any other thoughts?
No, I think you covered it, although one thing to note is that there's a lot more studies coming out in recent years focusing on this, specifically related to school improvement grants and school turnaround. And as those studies are released, the clearinghouse reviews them. And so you'll often see new reports, single study reviews of these kinds of studies and how effective the practices are.
Great. Thank you, Neil. We have a question, I think, for you, Neil, from an audience member about the kind of studies that get reviewed. One audience member wants to know about whether doctoral dissertations get reviewed by the clearinghouse.
Yes, they do. That's one of our places we search. As part of our systematic review process, the thing that makes it systematic is we're trying to identify everything about whatever it is we're studying, whether it's a particular program or curriculum or a certain kind of practice. And so we don't limit ourselves just to journal publications. We look in all sorts of databases, including dissertation abstracts, to try to identify any type of research out there on the program of interest. We also look through all sorts of gray literature and try to identify a variety of sources. We also, for interventions, will go to the developer or the distributor of the product and ask them if they know of any additional research. We're really trying to be as inclusive as we can and cast a wide net.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Here's a partly related question. One audience member wants to know how not only how different areas, different topics are identified for review, who decides that, and then how is there any effort to make sure that the reviews and specifically the conclusions of the review are independent from the U.S. Department of Education?
That's a great question. So in determining what kind of things we review, we take broad searches of the literature and of the public. We ask for public input on the kinds of things that people are interested in. The WWC started with a kind of narrow set of areas focused on beginning reading and math and dropout prevention and a couple of others. And as those areas have become more mature and we've reviewed many of the large interventions with research in those areas, we've expanded to other areas. So for reading, we moved from beginning reading to adolescent literacy. We have multiple math areas covering elementary, middle, and high school. We've expanded most recently to special education. As I mentioned, we're soon to have a post-secondary area, and we have science and dropout prevention, and we're looking into some of these school organization and governance and choice. And most recently, some teacher preparation and compensation programs. So we're really trying to expand and cover many of the topics in education. As we keep going forward, we have to prioritize each year what areas we're going to focus on. So that's based on a number of factors, whether how long it's been since there was an updated review in that area, how much research there is newly identified that we could review. And then within each area, we look at the whole set of interventions that fall in that area, and we look at how much literature there is for each of those and how recent it is and how recently we've done a report. So we have a lot of rules for determining these, and all of these rules are in our handbook. So we try to be transparent about how we make these decisions. As for independence, fortunately we are part of IES, and we have the ability to do our reviews and write our reports, and while they are peer-reviewed, IES sends them out, IES and the Department of Education don't tell us to change any of our review findings or our ratings or any of our reports substantively. So we're fortunate to be somewhat independent and objective in our reviews of all of these interventions.
Great. Thank you, Neil. We have time for one or two more questions. The next question, we'll start with you, Neil, and Josh may have some thoughts after you answer. A few audience members have asked a version of this question. How could participants as researchers use the WWC for research purposes?
As researchers. So we have a lot of what we've talked about today are products that are more for decision makers, people who need to decide on what type of product to use or whether to implement a certain practice in a classroom. But we also have a lot of materials related to researchers and helping them produce research that would meet WWC standards, to produce this high quality research that we believe. The best place to start would be our Procedures and Standards Handbook, which really describes our standards and all of those different design features that we look at. In terms of that's very useful in the design stage. In the sort of reporting stage, we have a reporting guide for study authors that lists the kind of information that we're looking for and that we need when we're trying to evaluate studies. For people who are doing research more broadly, we also have the database of the studies we've reviewed. As I said, there are more than 10,000 studies in there. So that might be a good source to find other research on a type of intervention that you're interested in or a type of research question that you're interested in.
I would just add that another useful thing is that the clearinghouse products can identify gaps in the literature. So the clearinghouse will release an intervention report and will say, no studies met WWC standards and evaluated this particular intervention. And that's a good way of identifying a pretty significant gap in the literature on that needs to be filled. And our practice guides can do similar things.
Great. Thanks, Josh. We are coming up on 2 o'clock here on the East Coast and the end of the webinar. I'll give one more question for Neil that I think he could answer fairly quickly. And let's do that, and then we'll wrap up. Neil, audience member, again in the research vein, has asked, is there some information they can get if they're interested in becoming a certified reviewer for the What Works Clearinghouse or along What Works Clearinghouse standards?
Right. That's a great question. We are happy to have people learn about our standards and the WWC in general. We offer trainings on our standards. Recently, they've been at least a couple of times a year. And when we have those trainings, they are announced on the WWC page in that image rotator that Josh mentioned. But if you want to let us know ahead of time that you're interested in a training when one comes up, you can always send an email through our help desk and let us know that you're interested in a training. And we will keep you in mind for a spot in the next training we have.
Great. Thank you, Neil. It's 2 o'clock now on the East Coast, and I see where some of our attendees are logging off as we come to the end of the webinar. Again, we'd like to thank you very much for your participation. We got to almost all of the questions, so if we didn't get to your question or you thought of something, as soon as you hang up, you can always ask us a question anytime. As Neil said, just go to our website, and Josh said, and use that, go to that help desk feature and ask any question, and we will get right back to you. And again, thank you so much for your time and your interest in the WWC.